This special Fireside chat is moderated by none other than Datuk Fadil, and YB Minister is on Malaysia's macro resilience, fiscal consolidation, and long-term economic strategy. Datuk Fadil, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Anita. Firstly, thank you, Minister, for that insightful and forward-looking keynote address. You have clearly laid out a compelling vision for the economy in a shifting global landscape and given us much to reflect on. I know, Minister, you have a hard stop at 3:30, so we're going to jump straight into two key areas. Firstly, Malaysia's evolving trade dynamics, including the upcoming deadline for US reciprocal tariffs. And secondly, the ongoing efforts on fiscal reform and consolidation. I would also like to take this opportunity to invite members of the audience to type in your questions on Slido via the QR code behind at the back of your name tags. I will also do my best to weave in your questions where possible. YB Minister, my first question, given that the 90-day country-specific reciprocal tariffs will end next week, could you provide us with an update on the status of the trade negotiations? What's the trade-off to get lower US tariffs?
Okay, I think Liberation Day created a lot of stress for a lot of people that were not liberated before. Yeah. So I guess a lot of countries around the world today have been managing and trying to understand how the reciprocal tariffs were designed and trying to understand how do we navigate along these changes. I think we go back to first principles, and I think from Malaysia's first principle, we fundamentally support multilateralism, and we want a trading system that is rule-based. Because whenever you have multilateralism, you open up bigger opportunities. Whenever you have rule-based engagement mechanisms, you have confidence-building structures that allow investments to prosper. And I think that's what Malaysia and the rest of the world has seen throughout our growth stages over all these years going forward. Be that as it may be, the decision to apply reciprocal tariffs has come as a challenging effect that's now affected a lot of people around the world. So Malaysia's position has been we will not retaliate because if you continue to poke at each other, I think at some point everybody goes blind and nobody gets to do anything. So Malaysia's approach has been in terms of forward engagement with the United States to firstly understand what are the issues at hand, and second, to figure out whether we can navigate a path that we can come up with a win-win situation. So I'm pleased to say that I think the US has been positive in responding to Malaysia's approach. And engagements have been done where both sides have had their trade teams talk about how we can navigate along the way. I think it's also important to understand where Malaysia comes from. And I think from a Malaysian perspective, if you look at the trade deficit in Malaysia, the trade deficit is about 24 billion US dollars a year or so. And it is a sum that is material to the US. However, it's also important to understand what constitutes the trade deficit. So when the teams go and explain the situation to the US, it's quite clear that the trade deficit is actually made up of some key components, electronics and semiconductors. And these two sectors, a lot of the players that are exporting to the US are actually multinationals, which are US-based entities. And so we're quite pleased when the US actually suspended any action for the semiconductor space, because I think it's a recognition that this was a critical asset that they wanted to protect. But for Malaysia, it's also important for that to be recognized also, because it shows that actually there's a lot of cross-dependency between Malaysia and the US. And I think in the engagements that we're having with the United States, we're pointing out that global supply chains are integrally linked together. And it's very hard to decouple without significant consequences. And it's probably not in the best interest of US companies also to be layered on taxes along the way. I think there is some recognition that there are truths within that statement. There are areas that we could do and we can look at scope to improve trade between both sides. But it should be on a win-win basis. So in other trades that Malaysia has with the US, it may be things like timber, gloves, solar panels, and so on. So where there are barriers that we can look at, Malaysia is prepared to look at improvements in the positions that we've had. So I think the two teams have been having good discussions and negotiations, and progress is being made along that line. There are also concepts of non-tariff barriers. So in the non-tariff barriers, I think the US position has always been talking about how do you open up so that the US have a capacity to enter into the market. So in our sense, I think the automatic reaction should not be rejection or any approaches. The automatic reaction should be, let's talk about it and figure out whether it makes sense for both sides if some loosening up of some tariff barriers could be put in place. I'll give you an example. Agriculture, for example. Malaysia is an importing country. We don't fully produce everything that we need, and there may be supply gaps in our system. And if adding a US supply chain into the Malaysian network helps, then I don't think Malaysia will be hesitant to do the necessary to actually improve the conditions for it to occur. But it must respect the rules and laws that we have here in Malaysia. So I think that's our positions that we've put to the US. So basically our approach has been, first recognize where things are coming from, where it is not in the interest for anything to be disrupted, let's not disrupt it. Okay. Where there are scope that we can open up opportunities, let's look at how we open up opportunities. Where there are areas where there are liberalization, then we can look at liberalization, but it must be on the basis that the outcome is win-win for both sides. And I think that's where the gist of the conversation is going. And all I can say at the moment, the feedback that we're getting is positive. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Moving into fiscal consolidation, how is the government approaching the 3.8% deficit target for 2025? And what are the key priorities to stay on track?
I think, before I get to fiscal consolidation, right? So, and because I'm under a lot of pressure nowadays, because everybody is saying I'm Mr. Evil because of SST, right? I think it's important to understand what we're trying to do with the Economy Madani framework. In the Economy Madani framework, what we want to do is actually propel Malaysia forward, improve the lot of the society, and rebalance back the equation in a better form. And a lot of good progress have been made in terms of driving, high-grading the economy. FDIs have been going up at record levels. We now have DDIs also operated at very high level, and that's helping to stimulate the economy. At the same time, rebalancing the economy on one side also means that we've been pushing things like better wages into the system. Civil servants got an increase last year to a fixed, minimum wage went up, progressive wage been pushed, and all the GLICs have embraced living wage, as for example. So when you have those two going at the same time, economy growth is actually purring along. And the rebalancing is also occurring so that our private consumption is actually moving on at the same time. And if you look at the macro numbers are pretty good. GDP first quarter 4.4, inflation up to April was 1.2%, unemployment was 3%. So if you are going to do any reform, start when your base is strong. Don't start when your base is weak along the way. And we've done that last year also. Despite the fact of doing diesel subsidy rationalisation, electricity rebalancing, water tariff changes, SST expansion also last year, inflation was only 2.5%, growth was 5.1%. So I think the Economy Madani framework is actually moving on and managing pretty well. So if you come back to what we need to do, I think we need to do more of the improvements that we pushed in. When we drove SST last year, when we refined subsidy rationalisation, we brought back fiscal space for the government, and it was better than expected, so we were able to drop fiscal deficit from the target 4.3 to 4.1% because revenue collection was better. This year, we're doing the SST and RON 95, and hopefully that will also add to revenue base along the way. But also what we're doing this year is also other measures. The e-invoicing methodology is a much more sustained methodology, because what we want to try to do is make transparent financial transactions in the country and make sure everybody who's got an obligation to pay tax pays tax. And if I chase people who don't pay tax because they're obligated to pay tax, you're not going to get angry with me, right? Yeah. So directionally, from what we're seeing today, growth is still strong. Revenue numbers are coming in the way we need to do. So we're quite confident that we'll get to the 3.8% by this year. But more importantly, we need to look at it on a wider scale. Is the economy also moving the right form? And I think the economy is also moving at the right pace.
Thank you. I was going to weave in some questions from the floor. There is a question here. Does MOF still expect additional SST revenue, estimated around 10 billion, after revisions exempting some of the imported fruits, beauty services, raised annual sales thresholds for leasing?
Okay. I think in reality, let's be practical about things, right? When we put out policy, and we roll out things, sometimes we get feedback. And if the feedback is something that may not have been well thought through, I think the government is fair enough to understand that it should adjust along the way. So when we adjusted apples and oranges and dates, I hope people were happy that we adjusted, and don't tell me why you U-turn. Because I think that's the wrong tag. The tag is, okay, the government has looked at it and felt it's better if we actually remove this from coverage, because these are things that probably now have become part and parcel of norm in society. And when we focus about lifting up the thresholds for coverage up to 1 million from 500,000, that was looking at making sure that the SMEs in Malaysia were also protected along the way. So again, it goes back to the philosophy of much more progressive, targeted approaches as opposed to blanket mechanism. So when we took the decision to do the revision, we also looked what was going to be the impact from financials. At the moment, I'm still confident because the economy is still puttering along the way it needs to do. And also, I do know my team is always fairly conservative in their estimate. So I think we will still get to the 10 billion that we targeted from this.
Thank you. You mentioned in your speech that the rationalisation of RON 95 will begin in the second half of this year. Can you share the government's thinking on scope and implementation? And there's lots of questions on RON 95 in the Slido, so just take it.
Okay, as you're all aware, doing RON 95 is a lot more different than doing diesel. Because diesel had a very small, narrow catchment. RON 95 affects pretty much everybody who drives in Malaysia, whether you do a motorcycle or you do a car. So the government wants to do it in a measured, calculated way, in a better form. So when we look at diesel, I want to use diesel as an example, what my end outcome should be like. The end outcome for us for diesel was actually to make sure that the people who needed to be protected were protected. And in diesel, we protected the people where we identified groups of people who we felt were still eligible to get some amount of support. So we gave them cash transfers to the Budi Madani program, 200 ringgit a month. If you met certain income criteria and you didn't drive any fancy cars, then you got the Budi Madani 200 ringgit. At the same time, people who are in industry, some farmers and so on, were also given Budi Agri and Budi Commodity on that same philosophy. We also were aware that in the logistic chain for the diesel, diesel is widely used to transport goods. So we didn't want the impact to flow through inflation in that manner. So we provided some subsidy support to fleet owners through the fleet card mechanism. And after we've actually done all this, we kind of ended up with a group of people that we felt that could actually bear the open market pricing. So on June 10th, we pressed the button, diesel price moved from 2 ringgit 15 cent to 3 ringgit and 35 cent overnight. What was the outcome? First, diesel volume in the petrol station dropped. The question is, why did it drop? It dropped because people in the past were taking diesel from retail when it was meant to be not taken from petrol stations, but commercial operators had to buy it from commercial dealers at market price. They figured out in the past that they could buy a petrol station in whatever form and reuse it for the business. Now, subsidies were never meant to be given to businesses to support their business. Subsidies were meant for the rakyat, for them to manage the cost of living effect and so on. So when we pushed the price up to market price, there was no incentive. So some of the diesel that went or not supposed to go to commercial sector disappeared. The second amount of diesel that disappeared was the one that went cross-border. Because the gap between Malaysia pricing and Thailand pricing was very high. So immediately when the pricing arbitrage dropped, that people stopped moving a lot of volume. And that's where all our savings came in. It came in from the biggest one, from the smuggling and the commercial one, and a small fraction from the ones that were market-facing within the country. And the ones that needed to be supported, protected, were protected along the way. So today, you see that diesel prices are moving weekly. People are comfortable with that part. And what is done now is protected Malaysia from any other future subsidy impacts because prices move on a weekly basis. For Ron, I want to achieve the same thing. I want to be able to achieve that we protect the people that we should protect. We remove leakages from the people that we should remove leakages from. And today, there is still leakage. Leakage still occurs for cross-border movements. Leakages still occur for people who are not supposed to end up using petrol for businesses, using it for businesses. And maybe some portion of society should not be deeply subsidized along the way because we can afford it. Let's be honest, people like me should not get subsidy. I'm quite happy to pay. Because we have reached a certain level of income in our lives, we should not require a subsidy to move on. So what the government is trying to do now is to determine where's the cut line. At what point do we actually cut from an income point of view that says you're eligible for subsidy? The second thing that the government wants to do is to make sure the mechanism that we use is actually easy enough and effective enough to make sure leakages don't occur from the mechanism. And for the moment, what we decided is to use the IC, because every Malaysian has an IC. If you're older than 12-year-old, you will have an IC. And if you have your IC, you're not going to lend it to your friend, because you know if the IC is misused, there will be other consequences from the misuse. So people protect the IC very well along the way. We've used the IC also for our SARA program, where we give people who live in poverty and absolute poverty some support, and they use the IC to buy goods in shops. Today, the SARA program covers 5.4 million people. They can buy in kedai runcit, they can buy in supermarkets, they can buy things, essential goods. And they go and value is loaded up through the system so that they get either 50 ringgit or 100 ringgit a month to do some essential good shopping along the way. 4,000 over shops have actually SARA running. So if I do a comparison to petrol, plus or minus about 4,000 petrol stations in Malaysia. I've done with the IC for SARA, it's covered 5.4 million. So it's not beyond the reach that we can also get the same outcome by using the IC for petrol also along the way. And the system works. So now, for that, we know the IC works. The key now is to get the petrol stations to embrace the changes that they need to make to the system so that when people go to the petrol station, they don't see a material change. So what you don't want is when people go to the petrol station, they line up. In the past, you just do a transact, you're out in 5 minutes, 3 minutes, you're very fast. What you don't want, you suddenly find 20 people in the line to claim the subsidy to move it on. So we're working through with all companies to make sure the recognition of the subsidy, the usage of IC is similar to what you do today. The ideal state is like today, if I go to a petrol pump, I can take my credit card, flash it at the pump, it releases, I pump my petrol, I don't even have to go to the shop. What I want to do in the RAW 95 is also get the same outcome, where you first go, touch your IC, it tells you you're eligible for subsidy or not. Then you touch your credit card to pay, and it's done. And you don't have to go into the shop. If you have to go into the shop, the same customer experience is actually felt when we do it. So from a change management point of view, it's not difficult along the way. The only difficult thing is to understand where the cut line is, are you eligible or not. The rest is the same. So that's what the government is working through, and we're confident by the second half of this year, we will get a system that will be operationable at the petrol stations that will allow us to control and push subsidy, and we will able to cut leakages where we don't want the leakage to go. And I apologize for people who are non-Malaysians, but actually our philosophy is the subsidy is for Malaysian. There is a value to be Malaysian. So the people who are Malaysians get the subsidy. If you're not, I'm sorry, you have to pay full market price. Yeah? If you're a foreigner coming to visit the country, pay full market price. If you are businesses, they are not supposed to use subsidized petrol, pay as what you are supposed to do in the normal cost of goods that you have to pay. Yeah? That's only fair. Because if you take that money away, you take it from the rakyat in a different form. So that's what we want to try to do and get it in place before the end of the year.
Thank you, Minister. Minister, there's quite a lot of questions relating to why not reimpose GST from a lower base, where government can distribute subsidy to target groups, from the surplus.
You didn't tell me you're going to ask me about GST. Anyway, GST. I think this is a practical question. Okay? The government has not said that GST is wrong. Yeah? The government has said that, okay, we understand that GST is a holistic system that allows full charging of the cost at the moment. Yeah, and actually probably may be efficient for businesses that it can run in this particular manner. But there are some realities that we want to point out. Firstly, GST is rakyat facing. Whatever you pass through the GST system goes straight to the rakyat. Yeah, because businesses get to input-output tax claims. They don't incur. Yeah, so GST actually hits the wide range of system a lot more than SST. With SST, I can target. I can pick or choose. Yeah, I made women very angry when we first said beauty, healthcare, and all kena. I can remove it also, make them happy again. Yeah, yeah. But if I apply GST, it will have to be, and I have to do a lot more complex mechanisms to actually get it done. The second thing is, we turned off GST in 2018. Yeah, it's been 7 years since we turned off. Most companies are not ready for GST. If we were trying to roll out GST, it will take about 2 years at least to get the updates necessary to get system ready to do a GST. The country cannot afford to lose this 2-year window. We have a lot of things that we have to do to make it run. So there is a practical lagging issue with GST. The third thing is, Prime Minister also was quite clear. He says one of our key focus for the economy Madani is also to help improve the lot of the rakyat. And one of the key things in lifting the flow is actually to get more wealth in the hands of the rakyat. Yeah, that meant lifting up wages. That meant giving support where support is needed. So there's more money in the rakyat's hands. So if a GST scheme were to be put when the wealth has gone up, I think the system can handle it. But today, when the average wage is less than 2,000 something is the average wage that a typical Malaysian gets, yeah, loading up the system puts a lot of pressure on it. So we want to see that we focus on the efforts of lifting the floor first to a better form, then we can think about whether GST can come in, and it needs to come in at an appropriate time. And today, our view is it's not the appropriate time. So we use tools that we have. And the tools that we have is SST. It's been running since the 1970s. Yeah, the systems are already there. And we have the capacity to turn it on as required.
Thank you. YB, there's a very interesting question here. Malaysia's labour income to GDP in 2024 stood at slightly above 33%. Developed countries' ratios range between 50 to 70%. What's the government's plan to address this?
I think as part of Economy Madani, I think our target is to push it higher than 45%. share of labor to the whole take. And I think one of the key things we need to do is a multiple fold. I think one of the key issues that the economy actually faces is that we are a low-cost economy. Yeah, a lot of our businesses depend on low-cost structures to compete. Yeah, if you want to export outside, we get cheap labor to come in, we get cheap land, we get lots of government incentives, and we compete on that as a basis to compete. And that's what's keeping us in the middle income track, and we can't punch through along the way. So I think one of the most important things that we have to do under the Economy Madani framework is actually to reset the game. And that's why in lifting the ceiling, we need to bring in higher value elements into our economy. Yeah, not labor intensive. Labor intensive things mean that we have a lot of foreign labor in the country. Total foreign labor in the country, plus or minus, is about 4 million people out of a total population of 34 million. Now, I'm not saying that the Malaysians will do the foreign labor's work, yeah? But whenever you have an option to have cheap labor at play, you suppress wages across the board. Now, I started working 36 years ago. Yeah? When I started working 36 years ago, my salary was 1,650 ringgit. Well, one of the better ones, but I wouldn't say I was out of mark. Yeah? Today, starting salary for graduates, 2002, 2004, yeah? If you go to one of the better places, 4,000. It's been 36 years since I started working. So why have we allowed the system to suppress? Because the type of industries that we have is low-cost based industries. We need to change the game. So under economy money, let's restructure the economy. Let's bring in higher value-added businesses in Malaysia. Higher value-added businesses allow higher value jobs to be created. Lift the wages of the rakyat. And I think then the take changes in that manner also, of how much goes to labor versus capital. So I think that's one of the key changes that we want to do. And I know there are a lot of skepticism out there. People will say it cannot be done. I say, what do you mean it cannot be done? I take the most boring, with due respect to people who are on some SD Guthrie, yeah, job in plantation, yeah. Plantation jobs, most of the time people will say it's a foreign labor job because it's hard, dirty job people don't want to do. But Samdabi has been brave enough to say today 40% of the non-harvesting workforce is Malaysian. By 2030, they want to make it 100% Malaysian. Yeah? How are they going to do it? By digitalization, by automation. If I get a worker and I tell a worker, I want to hire you to go and spray fertilizer or insecticide down the plantation, no Malaysian will want to do that. Say, malu lah, I go back kampung, where I put my face? Yeah, it's boring. But if I tell the worker, now I want you to become a drone operator, you go out, you do the same thing. You spray insecticide, you spray fertilizer. It's much more fun. Then that job, because it acquires a certain skill, you can also train them to the next level up after that along the way. So in the case of Samdabi, that's what they're trying to do. Introduce automation, digitalization into their system and displace foreign worker. Put that and create more jobs, but more high-value jobs for Malaysian. And in that restructuring mechanism, we create a better share of labor take to the economy. I think that's the art of what we're trying to do under the Economy Madani framework.
Thank you. Really, very active questions coming through. The inflation basket for Malaysia consists of heavily subsidized items. Are there a move to rationalize the basket to provide a realistic view of inflation?
Actually, if you read the DOSM punya booklet, the DOSM booklet will go very, very detailed and tell you what the prices of goods and so on. Actually, today, we are enjoying low inflation on the back of a lot of things that have come into our favor. Firstly, commodity prices globally have dropped. Yeah. So, for example, when I looked at the May DOSM numbers for vegetables, the DOSM number in May showed that vegetable prices have dropped 5.5%. Yeah, that's part and parcel of the basket that we include in inflation. So it is not because people are engineering the basket to suppress inflation numbers. It's because in the past, the reality is the cost of the goods were higher. Yeah. So if you look at what happened to the world, first COVID hit, then growth and everything slowed down, and supply crunches came in. And after that, Ukraine, Russia came in. Then the grain basket of the world was affected. And subsequently also what we found that not only was grain affected because of Russia effects, gas prices went up, so fertilizer costs went up. So then the commodity cost of goods also went up all the way through. And this fed through the whole system. Now we are years past that point, oil prices have come down to a lot better point, supply is better reach, prices readjust to the right level. Inflation now is behaving the way it should be behaving because the cost of inputs is reflecting it. So my message is, there's nothing wrong with the basket. The issue is we refuse to recognize what was the inherent cost of the inflationary element inside it. We also need to recognize that inflation hits different levels of society differently. There is a basket for the B40s, there is a basket for the M40, and there's a basket for the T20s. The food component for the B40s is very high. The food component for the T20 is not so high along the way. So if most of the inflationary elements were passing through the food, of course, the bottom end of society feels it more than anybody else. Now that the prices are unwinding, then we'll see the inflation is capping down, so that bottom will feel a bit more relief as it goes on. Now, inflation doesn't mean you get a negative price. Inflation means the price increase is low compared to the past. So a 1.2% inflation means price will still go up by 1.2%. But hopefully your pay will go up more than 1.2%. So in real terms, you're better off.
Thank you. I'm going to move away a bit from fiscal to touch on JSSEZ. There is strong anticipation around the upcoming blueprint. YB, can you share a little bit on recent developments or insights on what to expect?
I think I answered it during dinner that we were having yesterday. And I said, let's not wait for blueprints and stuff like that to happen. Because effectively, when we launched JSEZ, we told the whole society, and we created mechanisms to recognize zones that were already recognized in the JSEZ and incentives that were actually given. Yeah? Whether the blueprint comes out or not, the incentives are already there. That's why, from my speech just now, you heard the numbers that we were articulating out, that people are already spending money, investing money, because they see the incentives are already put into place. So incentives is one way to actually attract people to come. But the other thing is to recognize that the zone itself has value, because if you can collect more and more industries, collect similar industries, the ecosystem in the industry gets better. It can provide a better overall cost structure and everything, then migration things get better. If you can provide better logistics capacity, people will come because it's a lot easier to move goods in and out. And I think that's what the government is trying to architect to get things running so that we lubricate the JSEZ in a better form. But even today, as I mentioned earlier, right, the Facilitation Center has seen 26.1 billion. The Johor State has seen 30 billion in the first quarter, and it's targeting 100 billion of investments coming in. So I wouldn't worry you have to wait at the blueprint before you decide. I'm saying that people are already making decisions to come in, and because they can already see it, so come in earlier rather than later in that frame. What the blueprint will do, it will clarify what are the things that we are trying to facilitate, other improvements that we're trying to do, so you have a clearer map as it goes forward. But it doesn't change your investment premise mechanism.
Thank you. There's one or two more questions before we wrap up. There is this question that asks, the government has been in plan to redefine wealth structure of T20, M40 and B40. Could you share the progress of this redefining wealth strata?
I'm less than 1 week in carrying the job of the economy minister, and you want me to answer a fairly technical answer on that one. Okay, I'll cheat. Yeah, actually, what we need to do is we need to understand a bit better Because I think definitions such as B40, M40, T20 probably are a little bit more archaic rather than what is practical along the way. We need to understand what the cost mechanisms, the cost of living structures, whatever it needs that actually fits, and what is an acceptable living basis to reset the mechanisms along the way. So while the people in DOSM and KE are actually working it out, the government shouldn't stand still. It should be doing and encouraging certain things. So in the government's effort, for example, the effort that the government is doing by inducing our GLICs and GLC to embrace living wage is actually to push the society to a different mind frame. Don't think minimum wage, think living wage as your base starting point. Yeah? And today, we've already had 9 GLICs and GLCs that are fully compliant with living wage. Another 25 committing to announce it that they will be compliant by end of the year to the living wage targets. And hopefully from that 34 companies, there's already 153,000 people inside that's been affected inside it. Whenever the base salary is adjusted, the knock-on effect actually occurs on that chain. So what we hope to happen is that when this is catalyzed, if you want good people, you're going to compete with this group of people. Yeah, the GLICs and GLCs are going to pay a living wage as a starting point. And if you're not prepared to pay living wage, you're not going to get the talent that you want. So it is a disruptor in the mechanisms. But the whole idea of that disruption is actually to percolate the lifting up of wages on a faster pace to get everybody to embrace a living wage mentality. Now that, I think, changes the game. Then we don't worry about that B40, M40 and stuff. Let's do things that materially change society in a different form.
Thank you. I'm going to close up with the last question, which says, reforms are necessary. However, there's a possibility of the system facing some pain in the short term. What is the government's narrative on this? And perhaps we can wrap up with that.
I think the reality is what's happened to Malaysia over the last 2.5 years, 3 years. I think Malaysia is now in a space that has got clarity of direction. That's why we talk a lot about the economy Madani framework. It's got a policy stability because we've got a stable government. That's allowed confidence to be built within the investment community, that people now are saying, okay, I'm back. I can look at it because I can predict of things going to come. Now, all this didn't occur because we went out and market. All this occurred because we designed better clarity policies, and some of the policies meant that we had to take difficult decisions. Yeah, a lot of people talk about subsidy rationalisation. It's been there for 20, 30 years. People have been talking about this, right? But nobody dared to execute it. So this government decided to grab it and run with it because it was important. It was important because in the system that exists today, yeah, it created such imbalance that the benefits were not going to the intended group. So if it's not going to the intended group, let's fix it. And that's what we did with diesel. We fixed it. The people who are meant to get subsidy now get subsidy. The rest don't. Yeah? We stop leakages, which is why we get between 4 to 6 billion, depending where oil prices are, savings from diesel. Because leakages are plugged. It's not going to commercial, it's not going to overseas, it's not going to groups that were not supposed to get it. And what do? The 4 to 6 billion saving comes into the fiscal coffers of the government, and the government is reinvesting it back. It's reinvesting back to infrastructure, to basic needs of society. That's why, if you look at the number of schools that get built, the number of schools that get repaired, the hospitals that get repaired, the numbers are much higher over the last 2 years than years before, because there was fiscal space that was being doing it. So, does it hurt? I got to ask, who does it hurt? Yeah? If it's designed properly, you will protect the right groups of people along the way. And there are different forms of intervention. People talk to us and say, well, the old days were better. BRIM gave us more. Let me share with you a reality. In the old days, when you got BRIM, the The maximum amount you got under BRIM was 1,200 ringgit. Yeah? Today, the maximum amount you get from STR and SARA is 4,600 ringgit. Yeah? So for the ones who are needing to be supported, they are supported through intervention that the government does, and the government has also been able to step up investment to government services from all the reforms that have been done. So I think that's a good sort of transformation, right? Because the ones that need it, the country is progressing, the economy is growing, inflation is contained, it's paying out. Is it different? Is it something that you're not used to? Yes. And usually change is always difficult. Yeah? But the reality is the change for the better? I believe so. For the person who got 4,006 as opposed to 1,002, ask him, is life better? For the person who never got SARA, who now got SARA, ask him whether life got better. And I think the reality is, don't listen to the noisy few. Ask the people who actually get along the way, and are they seeing the changes along the way? Ask the students who go to school and says, is school a bit better? Because at least your toilet is fixed. In the past, it wasn't fixed, right? So in the past, people were whole. Wait, I go home, I go toilet. Yeah? Get these basic things done, and this is what the priority of this government is about. Fix the fiscal balance, put the things and put the spending in the right space. Which is why I'm not shy saying that one of the key things that we've been focused about in the budgets, let's make sure there are no mega projects. Get the basics right first, then we have space. We will then look at other things that we can do. But we need to get the social contract right. We need to improve education. We need to improve healthcare. Yeah, we need to improve basic infrastructure. This doesn't come free. We need to generate the revenues necessary to do it. We need to plug the leakages so we have the revenue to be able to do it, then put it back. And I think the track record is showing that we are able to do that, and we're playing it out now at this point in time. Yeah?
Thank you so much, YB. That was very insightful. And very clearly, fiscal reform and rationalization are all on track. And I think YB today and also participants today have raised a lot of questions, and it has been a very active sharing from YB. So I would like to, let's give a hand of applause and give it to YB for all the responses, and hand back the session to Anita. Thank you.
Thank you very much, YB Minister, as well as Datuk Fadil, for indeed a very candid and refreshingly insightful discussion. If we'd like to invite you both to just the front of the stage for a quick photo opportunity. On behalf of our organizers, thank you once again, YB Minister, for being with us today and taking this time. Another resounding round of applause for that wonderful discussion. Ladies and gentlemen, kindly rise as well, as YB Minister is about to take his leave, accompanied by Bursa Malaysia and Maybank.